So in this video, I'll be talking about what are the few things that you really need to look at before investing in any company or any startup. Now, ये video मैंने investors के लिए बनाया है, but I mean this video is equally good for entrepreneurs, founders, and colleagues, right? Like who are working in companies like startup companies or small scale companies. So this video, right? Like I mean, it's something that I'm going to share my all experiences where I have right. Like I initially I did things in wrong way, and then I corrected by learning through my experiences. मैं वो सारी चीजें आपको बताऊंगा जहाँ पे मैंने खुद से ये चीज़ें ट्राई की है एंड देन आई फील्ड दैट लाइक आई मीन आई शुड चेंज फ्यू थिंग्स. तो stay tuned and if you have any comments, if you have any suggestions, please share them through the comments section below, and I would be happy to get back to you on things that are very important and could be useful for all of us. So first point, right? Like I mean, first point is define your product or services that you really want to sell, and it should be in line, right, like with what कस्टमर्स आर लुकिंग फॉर. तो मैंने स्टार्टिंग में 7-8 प्रोडक्ट्स बनाए थे इक्विटी रिसर्च रिलेटेड, एंड आई ऑलवेज फील्ड दैट लाइक दिस आर समथिंग सिंस आई वर्कड इन इक्विटी रिसर्च डिपार्टमेंट, आई फील्ड दैट लाइक दिस आर फ्यू थिंग्स दैट आर रियली इंपॉर्टेंट, बट आई डिडंट चेक राइट लाइक एट दैट टाइम दैट विल clients pay for these products and services. I didn't do that survey. And what happened, right? Like in the beginning, when I created these products, I mean, it took almost 2.5 years, to sell the products. And, my hypothesis or my thought process was, I've created 8 products, and out of which perhaps even if I focus on 20 to 30% success, 2 or 3 products, right, like would be successful out of those or 8 products that I created. But, had I mean, there could have been, right, like few things that I would have done differently. One is, I should have got like few clients right away in the beginning itself. So I should have like got like some LOI, or I just kept like things in the stealth mode, which I thought, right, like would be a very nice thing to do, because like other people will copy the idea. But I'll tell you, right, like I mean, it doesn't matter. You just need to get like few clients in the beginning, because once you develop and once you create the product, it's too late for you to fix some of the things. So सबसे important चीज, define the product, services that you want to deliver, define it in a way like which will ensure that it is in line with what customer is looking for. Okay, this is the first very important point. Second important point, investors should definitely be cognizant of this point. Very important part is you have to give control to the entrepreneur or founder. Look, one of the reasons why, right, like I mean, founders or entrepreneurs, I mean, they are starting their company. I mean, many of them are were working, right, like in very large company, जहाँ पे बड़ी कंपनी है वहाँ पे वो काम कर रहे थे, but they decided to move out and start something by their own. So the important part is, right, like it's a very tough journey, right, like I mean, as everyone would know, I mean, and I'll make like a separate video on that, like on what goes through the mind of any entrepreneur. But क्या होता है उस वक्त, अगर like if they start, right, like working as if, right, like reporting to the investors or talking to the investors, getting their consent or creating a consensus mechanism where they are also listening to the investors, तो वहाँ पे ना फाउंडर का कंट्रोल जाता है, and then they just become, right, like I mean, any other large corporate where they are seeking permission from investors, they are seeking permission from mentors, from advisors, and उसमें ना चैलेंज ऐसे होता है कि देन you will always take an approach, right, like which is more safe as opposed to what you think, right, like would be the right approach at that point in time. So and क्या होता है कि like and then the failure, right, like in my opinion, if any product or any services, right, like that becomes successful, that is like it's a team success. That's like the thought process we all have, and that's like the right approach. But when the product or services, I mean, whatever you're planning to launch, if it is not successful, then the responsibility goes to the founder, right? Like you have to take the responsibility, you have to take. So imagine if you have to do that, then try to ensure that you are taking the shots, you are basically, right, like the buck stops at you, right? Like it's something very important that you have to look into. The third, right, like important part is making a perfect product before launching it. I mean, I made this mistake. I mean, as I mentioned, some of the products we were developing for 2.5 years. Can you believe, right? Like, I mean, you are making that product, you don't know whether this, like how this will be, right, like accepted. But What I've seen, that it's a iterative process, right? Like, and look, I mean, even right, like, I mean, like some of the greatest applications, including, I mean, the one Microsoft or Evernote, I mean, they are glitches, right? Like, I mean, in great products as well, and they keep on improving. So it's a kaizen, right? Like, it's a continuous improvement process. So don't, I mean, just create like a MVP. I mean, there is a very nice book, right? Like Lean Startup or 0 to 1, where you will know, right? Like what is minimum viable product. And I certainly believe that like you should create something which is a very basic product, and then you start, right, like testing the market by showcasing that product, rather than waiting for that product to be built perfectly, because which is not going to happen, right? Now, the fourth important part that you have to look into is, too much dependency on CEO. And there could be, right, like a really good example for this, right? Like, especially while playing cricket. I mean, you cannot depend on just one person, right? Like, I mean, imagine, I mean, in the past, right, like we're more depending on Sachin Tendulkar. And if he got out, right, like early, तो पूरी मैच गई. मैं तो basically, right, like मुझे याद है कि जब मैं सचिन तेंदुलकर को देखता था, and many times it used to happen, right, like कि वो जल्दी out हुआ, तो I mean, I used to stop watching the match because, look, I mean, I know, right, like now the result is, right, like we're going to lose the match. So what happens in case of startups also? Founders are always not Sachin Tendulkars, right? So तो मुझे ऐसे लगता है ना कि I mean, everyone has got, right, like their unique areas, right, like or strengths. So as a founder, you need to identify, right, like what are the strengths of your team members, and like work with them, delegate them, to the trust, right, like by giving the work to them, giving responsibilities to them. You cannot do everything I mean, just like as a one person. You cannot do bowling, you cannot do batting, you cannot do keeping, you cannot do fielding. I mean, like all these things, I mean, you need right partners, and you have to identify that. And whenever you are investing in the company, just try to see if this company has got the right team, where founder is not at the center, right? Like it should be a decentralized team, right? Like where other people are also part of it, and they're taking calls, at least, right, like on the operational levels. Fifth point that I would like to talk is create something people centric, right? Like not product centric. So earlier we talked, right, like a product doesn't have to be 100% perfect, right? Like you should not look for that part. But one thing that you have to look into is the product is, in addition to that point, I mean, you should look for is whether the product is created with like the users in mind or not. Many times what happens is we create like a product which is tech centric. तो मुझे याद है, right, like मैं जब प्रोडक्ट बना, I mean जो इनिशियल प्रोडक्ट्स हमने बनाए थे, तो वहाँ पे I always used to tell, I mean, this is the technology that we are using. I was extremely passionate about the technology. Technology is of no use, right? Like if the product is not useful to the right audience, तो टेक्नोलॉजी कोई भी रहे, राइट? लाइक अगर वो प्रोडक्ट यूजफुल है तो टेक्नोलॉजी, राइट, लाइक शुड एडजस्ट अकॉर्डिंगली. इट शुड बी पीपल सेंट्रिक, इट शुड बी यूजर सेंट्रिक, इट शुड बी क्रिएटेड लाइक थिंकिंग अबाउट लाइक हु इज गोइंग टू यूज एंड हाउ हिज लाइफ इज गोइंग टू चेंज, एंड हाउ आर यू गोइंग टू कनेक्ट दैट लाइक विद द रेवेन्यू इवेंचुअली टू मेक द प्रोडक्ट एंड द होल इकोसिस्टम सस्टेनेबल. तो लास्ट पॉइंट, राइट, लाइक सिक्स्थ पॉइंट दैट आई वुड लाइक टू टॉक अबाउट इज, so now the sixth important point is culture, and it is so important, right? Like I mean, मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि स्टार्टअप में इनिशियली ऐसे होता है कि I mean we focus more on the product, services, cash flows, investors, employees. I mean we want to actually trying to connect so many dots. लेकिन एक चीज़ जो हम भूल जाते हैं वो है कल्चर. एंड कल्चर डजेंट मीन दैट लाइक यू शुड हैव लाइक वेरी नाइस ऑफिस. मैं तुम्हें बताता हूँ कि लाइक जब हमने स्टार्ट किया था तब हमारा राइट लाइक 1 BHK परहैप्स 480 स्क्वायर फीट का ऑफिस था. एंड व्हेन आई आई एम आस्किंग लाइक सम ऑफ माई कलीग्स, राइट, कि तुम्हें अभी तक का कौन सा, जो फाउंडिंग कलीग्स थे स्टार्टिंग से थे, तो मैं पूछता हूँ उनको कि अभी तो हमारा ऑफिस बहुत बड़ा हो गया, बट आई ऑलवेज आस्क देम दैट लाइक तुम्हें कौन सा ऑफिस अभी तक अच्छा लगा. एंड एवरीवन टेल्स, राइट, लाइक द फर्स्ट वन दैट वी हैड, राइट, लाइक वेयर एवरीवन वाज सिटिंग टुगेदर एंड वेरी, it was, I mean, I personally felt that like it may not have been super convenient, but that's like one that they liked a lot. So मुझे ऐसे लगता है ना कि culture is not about just like having lavish office or like a lot of great things, right, like within the office. Of course they are important, but most important part is being genuine, like just being genuine and having positive intentions, right, like for all the employees. Like it's very important, and it's a collective belief, right? Like I mean, it's not, culture like doesn't just come from one person, right? Like I mean, it's a collective belief. So how would you find out, right? Like I mean, they are like, you have got like a unique culture. तो यू विल फाइंड इट व्हेन द सोल, राइट, लाइक आई मीन कैसे कि लाइक फिजिकली तो हम काम पे जाते हैं, काम करते हैं, बट व्हेन दे आर कनेक्टेड, राइट, लाइक इंटरनली ऑल्सो विद द कंपनी, देन यू विल आइडेंटिफाई दैट लाइक ये कल्चर बहुत ही अच्छा है. एंड दिस कुड ऑल्सो बी वन ऑफ द वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पैरामीटर्स टू लुक फॉर व्हेन यू आर इन्वेस्टिंग इन द कंपनी, बिकॉज कल्चर विल bring the sustainability, right, like to the organization. So what I've done, right, like I mean recently, especially from past 8-9 months, that every day I send like one message to everyone, right, like in the morning. And if you also want to be part of that, I mean I'll perhaps, right, like put down that in the first link, pin that comment, and feel free to join, right, like if you also want to be part of that daily messages. And it's just like 1, 2 or 3 sentences messages which will bring, right, like slowly positive impact, right, like on everyone. And the whole idea is that to get 1% better daily. So if you also want to be part of it, like feel free to join that link. And I hope you found this video helpful. अगर तुम्हें कुछ कमेंट्स है, तुम्हें कुछ सजेशंस है, तो प्लीज फील फ्री टू पुट डाउन इन द कमेंट्स. इट विल बी हेल्पफुल not only for me but for other viewers also who are going to watch this video. Thank you.